un gars d'ici, être le directeur de général des Canadiens est une occasion d'une vie.
Enjoy the moment, you're in the NHL here.
Working for the Montreal Canadiens is a dream. La plus grande franchise dans la histoire du hockey.
If it was my last day on this planet, and you told me what would you like to do, I would want to be in that building on a Saturday night.
Yeah, like I said, Chris, it's a pleasure to have you. I'm really excited. I've been a fan of your stuff for a while. In fact, on this particular topic, I know you did a podcast. It was one of your last podcasts of your old version of your podcast. Was shortly after this news came out from the NCAA, and I really, really loved what you had to say about it and the approach you took to it. It wasn't sort of a you'd obviously done your research and done a deep dive on it, and I appreciated that. And so now that I'm thinking about this topic again, I thought that you'd be the perfect guy to have on to talk about it. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Looking forward to chatting about it.
So just to catch up some of the viewers, listeners, I know this will be nothing new to you, but last November the NCAA approved a change with respect to their eligibility rules, and essentially the new rule would enable prospects who participate in major junior ice hockey or on some professional teams to retain NCAA eligibility. And this is a part that I think we'll get to later, as long as they are not paid more than actual and necessary expenses as part of that participation. And that new rule came into effect at the beginning of last month. And we've also already seen a bunch of repercussions from that rule. The most obvious being the CHL players who've decided that they want to go and continue their careers in the NCAA. Gavin McKenna being the biggest name, Caden Lindstrom, Keaton Verhoff, Malcolm Spence, and I think we could probably name a bunch more. We've also seen that some of the players from the USHL and the BCHL, guys who were in those leagues with the specific intent of maintaining their NCAA eligibility, have made the jump to the CHL because they don't need to worry about that anymore. And then something I also got from one of your recent podcasts, and didn't realize this myself, but we've even recently had two guys who played professional hockey in Hudson Thornton and Connor McLennan sign on with Bemidji State, and they were approved by the NCAA, despite the fact that Thornton had played around 50 professional hockey games in the AHL and ECHL, and that McLennan had played, I think, 9, and was also a 6th-round draft pick of the Philadelphia Flyers. So the landscape has already changed a lot, and I don't want to talk about that because I think it's been talked about a ton already. But I want to talk about more what might happen as things continue to go forward. So I guess maybe first of all, I'll give you a chance just to comment on the rule change and some of the things I just mentioned in the intro, and get your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think the important thing to know about this whole thing is that we're still learning about it ourselves. I think that we are going to continue to learn about it. It's going to take years to really sort out what this ultimately is going to do. But in the early stages, it has been a seismic shift in all ways. I mean, you have top end players from the CHL going to the NCAA. You have guys that were on the USHL track going to the CHL. So it affects leagues in a lot of different ways, and we're still going to wait and see exactly how it all works out. I think when there's something new and shiny and there's a new, everybody's kind of racing to be the first or to be, to go towards that shiny thing. And what I think is going to ultimately happen is that it's going to be a number of players going to find out it's not for them. A number of players are going to find out that, there are things that maybe they didn't expect or didn't anticipate in terms of what it was going to be like. And then there's also going to be players that are still going to make some decisions that maybe aren't really in concert with where they're at in their development. Because one thing I'll say about the NCAA ranks is, as I think a lot of these CHL players are going to find, is that, well, I think they're all extremely talented and should be able to make the adjustment in a relatively quick manner. It is going to be an adjustment. There is a different level of play. There's more structure. There's more older players. There's strength. So there's a lot to it that really gets in there. And then there's also the school element. You still have to maintain eligibility. I think for some of these one and done guys, maybe they'll get through the first semester, white knuckle it, and then, the second semester is what it is and you're on your way. But I think that there's, some guys that really wanted that challenge and wanted the opportunity to be on their own. So, like I said, I think it's going to take years to really understand the full impact of this. And, I think that's going to be, very interesting to watch and something that, I'm sure we'll talk more about today.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I want to get into is what happens in those years, and I think
Yeah.
I kind of view it, and then the questions I'm going to ask you about are going to be more from a league's perspective, I think, than from the player's perspective, and I think getting into that, one of the big things that I've sort of noticed coming out of these changes is the gap, the wealth gap that there seems to now be between college hockey and junior hockey, right? These colleges have. I won't say they have unlimited resources, but certainly as compared to most junior hockey programs, they do. And so now, not only do you have the ability for the players to go back and forth between the two, but you also now have an NCAA that's created with this rule a situation where they've got a significant advantage from a financial perspective. So the NCAA can pay their players now with the NIL rules. Technically, the CHL still can't. I wonder if that's something that might change. And then, the facilities, I think, are a big issue as well. And I know you've talked about that on various podcasts as well. So I guess my question is, what type, I guess there's a two-part question. One, what kind of changes do you think junior hockey can make to deal with that gap? And two, how does that look? I mean, can a forward-looking junior hockey team take advantage of this new landscape to try and get ahead of the others? And maybe I'll ask you some more questions after that, but I'll let you answer that for now. How do we deal with that wealth gap, and how does junior hockey survive that?
Yeah, well, I think the thing that is important to remember for both sides of this is that the system as it was before worked just fine. Like a lot of players still go to the NHL straight from the CHL, and maybe there's an AHL year or two in there. Maybe there's some other things that they have to do, but in large part, the development is tried and true. What I think the colleges are offering that is different is, yes, you mentioned the wealth gap, and I think that is absolutely true, because we're, hockey programs at most schools are not necessarily completely funded by the hockey team themselves. They have basketball and football, and these are, multi-billion-dollar operations at the collegiate level when we talk about teams in the Big Ten and others. So there's huge value there. The NIL portion, I think it's still being understood exactly how that's impacting hockey. We all believe that Gavin McKenna received the largest NIL package of any player in hockey. It pales in comparison to what the players in football and basketball are able to make in the same market. And I will say that the it's not going to be common that there are many that schools have that amount of weight to throw around financially. Just because the money isn't necessarily going all to hockey. So you have smaller budgets. I think, there are certainly going to be some players that aren't Gavin McKenna that are making in the six-figure range this year as well, which is obviously no small thing for a teenager or anyone for that matter. But, I think that that's going to be kind of figured out as time goes on. There will be more regulation. I think that that's coming. That there's going to be, the federal government has even kind of stepped in and said we need to do things. It's kind of going to be up to Congress to make laws and stuff if they want to do it that way. I think it's, not the best use of the government's time, but whatever, like that's not how
It's Canada. Hockey.
Yeah.
Hockey. We don't mind the government getting involved in hockey. In
yeah, exactly. Like where the prime minister can, have a influence on a Connor McDavid situation or whatever else.
Yeah.
But I think that the biggest thing that I think the schools have at their disposal is the budgets that they have for player development that is dedicated to player development. Top of the line weight training, recovery facilities, the best of the best in strength and conditioning coaches, a full-on nutrition plan with the food provided to the players from the athletic department. The travel amenities. I know that, there are some junior hockey coaches out there that, kind of scoff at the fact that, these guys aren't willing to ride the bus anymore and things like that. And I was like, well, bus versus charter, like it's kind of, especially, you think about some of those long trips in the WHL and other things like that, like two guys that have had back injuries, Caden Lindstrom and Roger McQueen, both went to college hockey. And I think part of the reason was they didn't have to sit on the bus, and really that's actually a net, net positive for them, for their recovery in these injuries. And so we'll see exactly where that all nets out. But to me, the way to answer your question about the way that the junior hockey teams combat that, well, we've started to see some teams are investing. The OHL announced new investment plans for things like nutrition, medical care, different things that they're trying to increase and have their teams increase for their for their players. And that's a big part of it. Competition forces you to get better. You don't have to spend to the level that the NCAA is to have to develop hockey players. But you do probably have to do a little bit more and have to provide a little bit more. The way that I see it is that this landscape only benefits players. It's going to cost teams more money, but if they want to develop the best players, if they want to attract the best players, it is going to cost money to do that. And to do that with better facilities, better opportunities, practice times, all those things. There's a lot of different things that are a huge benefit. And it was interesting to hear a lot of these CHL players cite the additional practice time, the schedule, like that used to be the knock on college hockey. They didn't play enough games. How are you going to get better if you don't play enough games?
Yeah.
But what they've shown is that their coaches are developing players extremely well in practice. And I think that can be done at the junior level as well. Finding better ways to schedule things out is probably going to be a challenge for those leagues as well, as how do we make sure that we're maximizing development time without taking away, those opportunities in games. So those are some of the initial things that I think are going to happen here.
Yeah, so just I'll get back to a couple things you said there. Just getting back briefly to the aspect of the players being paid. Like right now, the CHL, you can't pay the players. The rules say, I mean, there's obviously a certain amount you can give them, and of course, the caveat that came with the new rule was, and I'll read it again, actual and necessary expenses, and we can all wonder what that actually means now that we've got a couple of at least two professional players who presumably were paid in the ECHL more than just their actual and necessary expenses. Is there, are you seeing anything on the horizon as far as the CHL being able to pay their players? And then what does that mean for smaller market teams? I'm in Halifax, so Halifax has probably one of the more financially stable junior hockey teams. But if you're in Lethbridge, or you're in some of the smaller markets, what does that mean for those types of organizations?
Well, yeah, and I think that's where the league commissioners and the governance and Hockey Canada are going to have to, really figure out what they want to be. There have been challenges in years past where players have tried to, get their status changed to being employees and different things that have never really come to fruition. And I think in this modern society, like the whole thing too, that further complicates it, you got teams on both sides of the border, you're dealing with different laws and different things like that. So there's a lot of things that are going to take time to figure out. Like, do I think that there will be a path someday for CHL players to earn extra money? Potentially. I think that because of those reasons, because it's not something that is going to benefit many teams, that it might be a much harder thing to pass. I think that owners would be reluctant to get involved in those kinds of bidding wars. There are obviously teams like Halifax, like Moncton, like London, other, that are such vital assets to their community, but also incredibly well funded from an ownership standpoint. And the imbalance that could potentially create would be a negative probably for junior hockey as a whole, and certainly the smaller markets that wouldn't be able to compete in that way. The way that the junior hockey world is set up is that you don't pay the players, but you try to give them everything else at the top of the line. It's owned buses, and it's the gear and everything that they try to give you, and the weight training and all the other stuff and the medical. All that stuff is at a really high standard. I don't think anybody should think that the CHL teams are operating at a diminished state. They just aren't. That's not, they are well funded in the ways that help players get better and healthier. But it is a difference. So,
Yeah.
I think it would be hard to get into an NIL kind of situation. But I think if there are ways where, if you're giving players cuts of their jersey sales, if you're giving players cuts of, whatever, their bobblehead or whatever, if there are ways to do some of those name, image, and likeness kind of deals that they're doing in college, where there's, the player is performing a service, he's getting money for that service, or he's lending his name, his image to other things. Maybe that's a way to bridge the gap some. But again, that's going to require some overhauling. And then also, if those players want to stay eligible for college where they could earn potentially more, they might have to pass on those opportunities as they are, so as to keep their eligibility. But as we saw with, as you mentioned, Bemidji State, 2 players that were playing professionally last year did get through. You just wonder if the NCAA clearinghouse just simply can't keep up with all of these changes, and they're just kind of like, well, we're whatever, go ahead.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where it's getting interesting.
Another thing that I thought about, and I don't know, maybe you've thought about it as well, is I've always wondered about, one of the reasons why the, NCAA programs have as much money as they do is because they do a really good job of fundraising through alumni. I mean, obviously there's other aspects of it as well, television and all that stuff. But I think also, when we think of college sports, we think about boosters and we think about alumni and whatever. Do you envision a scenario where a junior hockey team, if they were, a little bit forward thinking, might go out there and look at their former players and the guys who were in their program as juniors who, maybe multimillionaires now, in their NHL careers, and, and say, listen, guys, we're in a bit of a crisis situation here as far as finances go. Do we want to have a scenario where, those players could maybe, kick back a little bit money or even, get into the ownership somehow and sort of, a system similar to the boosters and alumni at college, you would have something like that, which would allow even like some of the smaller market teams to keep up as far as, the facilities at least and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there has long been ways the teams have attracted players, right? And some spoken, some unspoken, and that happens in all areas. I think even, there, but I think to your point, the question is, do you want it to be a charity, or do you want it to be an investment opportunity? I think for some of those players as well. And that's the other thing that you kind of have to get into. And certainly at the collegiate level, it's much more of that charitable donation kind of situation where people are giving money to collectives to use for buying players or paying players. And that is something that you could potentially replicate at the major junior level because of that alumni base that you have, because there is such a deep connection, and that and a lot of those players do give back in various ways to the communities where they were in junior. So I do think that that's absolutely possible to see where we're at, but we're definitely going to continue to see this evolution. I don't know what it's going to look like yet, but that's one avenue that could be explored, is like, hey, do we have a fund set up for our players? Do we have something that, we're able to get a pool of money and we can distribute that pool, either equally or what have you. The other thing that's important to remember about this situation with the junior teams, one of the largest expenses any junior team has is the money that is paid for the education package that they give to their players. So there is a an amount of remuneration that players get for playing in the CHL. Now, the guys that go pro, many of them don't use those education packages. The players that are going to the NCAA will also not be using those education packages. And so that does free up additional money for those teams. Yeah. And I think that we may see players stay in the league for shorter periods of time to use that. So they would only have, 2 to 3 years of education package money if they were to go elsewhere. There's also an expiration date on those for those guys that do go try and play pro hockey. So, so it's important to remember that, there are financial benefits for players, getting your school paid for being one of those things, that still exists there and will continue to exist there. And like I said, not every guy is going to get a chance to go to NCAA Division I. There's still going to be a pipeline of players that are going to be able to go to U Sports and play at that level. So I think we're going to see where everything goes with that. So, I think there's a lot more to be learned, but the CHL, I think at this point in Hockey Canada, has to explore all avenues of doing what they can to try to keep the players as long as they can. Or, maybe there's a path towards, shifting focus and saying, maybe we just do get younger and focus on keeping the best 16 and 17-year-olds in the league and then go from there. So there's so many different ways that can go.
So that's a great segue into my next question. This is something I haven't fully worked out in my brain yet, but it's something I've thought about. The idea that again, a forward-thinking junior hockey team might look at, creating relationships with NCAA programs. I know that players can go wherever they want, and it's not like you could have a situation where the Ottawa 67 send all of their players when they turn 18 to a specific university, but certainly a relationship where there's an agreement where the junior team says we'll encourage our players at a certain age, if they're looking at the college route, to look at Michigan or to look at Michigan State or to look at wherever. Like, do you envision a scenario where that could work, where and maybe the NCAA program kicks back some money to that group and says, we'll build a training center, in Ottawa and something like that, where there could be a relationship between a CHL and an NCAA program. Right now, there seems to be a lot of animosity between the two, and I think if you were smart enough about it, I think you could maybe, put that aside a little bit and use this to your advantage to a degree.
Yeah. So I would say that there are some schools and teams that are forming relationships now. Now, I don't think it's going to be a formal pipeline relationship similar to what it's not like that in the USHL right now. It's not like that in certain, other junior programs and leagues. So I do think that the teams in the CHL that are working towards, working with NCAA teams instead of against them will potentially be able to get more players that they might not have gotten before. The thing is, there's still a draft. There's still there are not ways to acquire players from the junior side of things like they can in the NCAA, where there is no draft and you just take whoever you want.
Yeah.
So that does create another dynamic. But I think when you think about teams, and there's a number of CHL general managers that played college hockey. There's a number of guys that have been burned by this college agreement, and they're alumni of it. So I do think that there will be relationships formed, but it's going to be more on a team by team basis. I don't think that we're going to see a very formalized structure to that. But I think, if they're saying, if you've got a player that's choosing between team X in this league and team Y in that league, and that college program is going to have a lot of influence over where that 17 or 18-year-old plays that year. And I think that's going to be pretty fascinating to watch, in terms of how teams are directed. The other thing that I think is important too is that, these players, they may not sign their contracts as quickly as they had with their NHL teams, which does create kind of some of this, that then now you have an NHL team that is going to have influence over where a player plays. And I think, as we've seen so far, the teams have mostly been hands off and said, go this, do this way. You make your decision. You tell us what you need. Like the Flyers were very hands off with Porter Martone. They let him make the decision. What are you going to do next year? I think they would have been happy to sign him to a contract, But again, you sign that NHL contract, that is an end date. If you sign that contract, that college path is no longer viable for you because you've gotten a signing bonus, you've gotten you're playing at you have a contract from the highest professional league in the nation. So, those are the things that will stop you. So, yeah. So, I mean, like, the thing is that these players are getting pulled in a lot of different directions, and they're going to have to be very self-aware and have agents that are very open-minded about where they should be, and just kind of let things come as they do. But yeah, I think if you're a junior team and you're not forming relationships with those NCAA teams, and you're not trying to do at least some working together as opposed to butting heads, you're going to probably have fewer options when it comes to those players. Because if player gets drafted by a college team, or gets recruited by a college team that you have no relationship with, what are you going to do to stop, to stop that? So that's, it's going to be interesting to see how that works.
And that kind of gets to my next question, was kind of that same idea. Like, do you, like, a scenario where the CHL makes, or NCAA for that matter, creates relationships with NHL teams? So, like you said, Philadelphia took a bit of a hands-off approach to Porter Martone, but we have seen in the past scenarios where NHL teams have drafted a player and then said, oh, you're in junior, or I guess it's really been the other way around in the past, where you got a player who was in the NCAA and they said, well, we'd rather you play a year in junior. I know Charlie Coyle was in that scenario. I know he did switch over to the St. John Sea Dogs, but like a scenario where, a junior hockey team creates a relationship with an NHL team, and, so that, the NHL team would then say, well, we would prefer that, you go to the Halifax Moose. Now, I know there's draft issues involved there, and, Charlie Coyle was drafted, I think, late in the Quebec League draft, that year. So he didn't really have any choice where in the league he was going to go. But, do you ever, I mean, again, I know that's something I'm just sort of, I think, like you said, a lot of this is still going on and it's going to change. But is that something that you see as being a potential as well?
Absolutely. I think that has already happened to a certain degree, where teams have said, hey, I think, you played at this level, whether it was high school prep, like, Blake Vanek was drafted last year. And I don't know if he was advised by the NHL team or if this was his own decision, but, he was going to return to the USHL. The Chicago Steel ultimately ended up deciding to go to the WHL. That's a drafted player. That, now, whether or not that was the team saying that, I can't tell you for sure, but I do think that that does happen, where it's like, hey, you're committed to go to wherever, University of Minnesota, wherever you're going to go, but we think you should get a year here at this junior league,
Well,
and that has happened to a certain degree.
Arseny Radkov for the Canadiens, right? Drafted this year. And commitment to UMass, and is going to play a year before he goes to UMass at Blainville for what looks like a pretty stacked junior hockey team. And so, from his development point of view, I don't know to what degree the Canadiens pointed him in the direction of Blainville or what have you, but again, that's a good example of it as well.
For sure.
Sure. Well, that's great. Those were pretty much what I wanted to get to about the NCAA stuff. Unless you've got any closing comments about that, maybe I think I would be remiss, and maybe we can have another chat another day more about prospects. But I think I would definitely be remiss if I didn't at least talk a little bit about prospects with you.
For sure.
And what I want to talk about is Lane Hutson, and I know there's definitely probably a perspective out there that Canadiens fans think that rainbows fly out of Lane Hutson's rear end, and there's probably a number of other fan bases who think that he's overrated and like to point to secondary assists and all of those things, and that's fine. That's always the way it's going to be. But one of the things I really am sensitive to, and one of the reasons why I like to do the show, is because I like to sort of face off a little bit against some of the narratives that I don't believe are that accurate. And one of those narratives is that Lane Hutson is not a good defensive defenseman. And it's a narrative that I think gets repeated so much that it's almost taken as fact. And again, I don't want to get adversarial about it. I know there's people out there in the prospect analysis world who have different opinions about Lane Hutson. And obviously, as Canadiens fans, we get pretty bent out of shape about that sometimes, but I want to sort of maybe make a bit of a case to you, and
Sure.
you can let me know what you think about it. So I'm going to bring up a graphic here, and I don't know how well you'll be able to see it. So this is a graphic of the top 12 vote getters for the Norris Trophy last year. So as we know, Lane Hutson won the Calder Trophy last year, but he also got some votes. I believe he was 9th in the voting for the Norris, which I guess might surprise some people. And I want to just look at this, and again, I don't know how well you can see this, but if we look at this is the last 30 games of last year. So, obviously Hutson was a rookie last year. The last 30 games of last year, of the 12 top vote getters for the Norris Trophy, only one had fewer expected goals against than Lane Hutson. And that, I mean, surprisingly, again, that's Evan Bouchard. Again, if I said who that would be, I think people would be surprised to know that it was Evan Bouchard. And as far as expected goals percentage goes, he was 3rd in the last 30 games of last year, ahead of Quinn Hughes, ahead of Cale Makar, ahead of Zach Werenski, ahead of even Jacob Slavin. So that was something that I thought was pretty interesting. And I know that Hutson, and maybe I'll let you comment on that first, and then maybe we can get into it a little bit more.
Yeah, so I think part of the narrative certainly comes from the size factor. Obviously, I think that everybody knows that knows anything about Lane is that's the first thing that most people are going to bring up. And what I'll say is that the metrics, such as they are, expected goals, other things like that. The fact that he's often going to be, when he's on the ice, his team is often going to have the puck more than the other team. I think, that's that. I think that there's being part of being a good defensive defenseman anymore is having possession of the puck, is making sure that your team has possession of the puck. That's something that Lane Hutson can do because he escapes the zone very well. He gets into the offensive zone very well. He's aggressive in the offensive zone. He moves pucks extremely well. He's got a high-end hockey sense. His skating is outstanding. So you have all these different things that are good. I think when you're saying, okay, well, if he stands in front of the net and there's a 6'4" guy next to him, he's going to get in the way, but he's not really always going to be able to tie that guy up. That's just physicality. That's nothing that he can control. But the thing that I always come back to with Lane about why I think he's a successful NHL defenseman is that his compete is completely underrated because of his size. He is an absolutely a dynamo offensively, but he cares when he doesn't have the puck. He needs to get that puck back. And so that's really good. He gets under players very well. He doesn't shy away from that, even though, he will occasionally get, manhandled, which is going to happen from time to time because of that's the way it is. There's just the size differential. It's not for a lack of effort. It's not because he's soft on a puck. There's just, I disagree with that completely. Right. So, but I think that there are going to always be limitations that he has no control over. And when it's him versus Tage Thompson, give me Tage Thompson in that one-on-one, right? That's just the way it's going to go. But I think that the fact that he has such tremendous puck possession capabilities is a huge boon to his offensive capabilities. So, or his defensive capabilities because of the way that he handles the puck. So that's, the thing is that how does he positively impact the game? He positively impact, and the positives far outweigh the negatives for Lane Hutson.
So,
go ahead.
Sorry. The other, I mean, just to get back to that, I mean, I agree with you. In front of the net, he's not going to outbattle, Mikko Rantanen. He's not going to outbattle, those guys. He's not going to win that physical battle. But what I found, and again, I find there's, you as somebody who, watches the entire league, and me as somebody who predominantly watches the Montreal Canadiens, obviously I have an interest in the rest of the league. One of the things that I see from Lane Hutson is that, as a kid who's always been small, he's learned, some non-traditional ways to defend. And his way of beating Tage Thompson in a battle isn't to put his shoulder into him and try and run him over. His way of defending Tage Thompson is to get in and get out, right? Get in and use that quick stick and use his quick feet to get in and get out. And I find like if you watched him last year, you saw that progress. And as you know, one of the I think one of his best assets is his ability to learn, right? He's you know, we laugh in Montreal, we call him a hockey nerd. He's one of these kids who's always learning, and you can literally see him from game to game making, adapting to, oh, I did this in this game and it didn't work, I'm going to try something new. And to me, that's one of the things that's really spectacular. He's not dumb enough to think that, oh, I am going to stand in front of the net with Tage Thompson and try and bully him and run him over. I have to do, something a little bit different, from that perspective. And so that's what I really enjoy about him, is that he seems to have, taken on his size and accepted that I can't do things the traditional way. Now I have to try a bit of a different way to do those things.
Yeah, you know what? I think that's the advantage of small players throughout developmentally. They've always typically been small, so they've always had to find new ways, right? They've had to find different ways. And to Lane's credit and his younger brother Cole, like they have found a way. Like Cole's actually a little bit meaner. Lane's just we all Lane. He's a fierce competitor, but he's also a very nice young man. Yeah. But like they have that stick, and the thing is that what I think makes them especially exciting is that once they do get that puck away from somebody, it's either they're making a play or it's off their stick and out of trouble pretty quickly. So they have that processing speed, which matters so much. So I think for me, Lane Hutson is unique, and to try to fit him into any one single box is probably not the best, or since there's no precedent really for a player that's kind of like him. We've actually, I shouldn't say that, because we've seen players like that. They just haven't had the degree of success that Hutson has. I think about guys like Ryan Murphy, who was one of the best OHL defensemen I've ever seen, and really it never translated at the NHL level. There's a lot of guys that like that. Quinn Hughes is obviously, he had a lot of the same knocks as Lane, but coming into his draft year was a little bit bigger than Lane was. And so that even increased the scrutiny on Lane before. But I just think, to discount him solely because of his size is a mistake, because what did we see last year? We saw a very unique hockey player. I do think it's possible that we see a tiny bit of a step back just as the league adjusts to him this year. Mm-hmm. And that may be in a production way. It may be in just an overall game impact way, but I don't think it's going to be dramatic. And I don't think it's going to be something that lasts. I think the thing about him, as you mentioned, he adapts too. And he's always adapted to find a way to be the best player. So it's amazing.
It's one of the quotes that I really liked, and I can't remember who said it, and it was more in relation to the Canadiens drafting LJ Mooney this summer. Was that the smaller players who tend to make it in the NHL are the ones who realize that they're small, and it's not the ones who go out there and say, I'm small, but I'm going to go out and be big and whatever. Yeah. It's the ones who say, okay, I'm small, I have to do things differently. And one of the things again, just sort of more on a technical, one of the things I love about watching Lane Hutson defend is that typically when your opponent has the puck, you're taught to sort of back off them a little bit and give them space.
Right.
If you watch Lane, as soon as opponent, his mark gets the puck, he's on them right away. He takes that time and space away from them, and his stick is quick enough that he can get away with that. But that's something that I'm sure, he was working with, his coaches, his dad, whatever, since he was a young kid, that I can't afford to back off that 6'5" power forward. I have to get into his skates and get close to him and shut that down right away. And, learn that, and he adapts.
Yeah, gap control is different for him, right? He can't cede that ground. He can't allow that guy to get that head of steam, because once he lowers the shoulder, it might be over for him. So he's got to be on it. Two guys that I think did this extremely well, and something that you see from Lane, it's like, I guess I call it like defending from the side as opposed to defending head on.
Right.
It's basically giving that guy that little bit of room, but your stick is all over him. Duncan Keith, people kind of, I think, forget that Duncan Keith was not a large man. Mm-hmm. He was a 5'11" defenseman.
5'11", 6 foot,
tough as nails, obviously, but but he defended primarily, because he was such a tremendous skater, he's like, I'm going to match you stride for stride, and I'm going to harass you the whole way in. And you're either going to lose the puck or you're not going to be able to get the shot that you want off. And that's just as effective. It might not be the, strip the puck and go the other way. But Quinn Hughes also does that too. And like, I think Lane does this thing similarly. They use their elbows a lot, actually. Get inside a guy, get your elbow in his ribs a little bit, get underneath him, and you get that leverage. And that's really effective too. So those guys have those capabilities. And I think Duncan Keith might actually be the best to ever do it, in terms of what I've seen, and just like creating those disruptive, if I can't take you out, I'm going to make sure it's impossible for you to do what you wanted to do,
right?
Because I can outskate you. And so, you find a way, and Lane has found a way. And I think that fans should continue to be excited about what he's going to bring to the table, because he's completely different than anything we've really seen in the league before.
So just, you touched, we'll end on this, and you just touched on it about Lane's skating. And that's another bit of a false narrative about him is, obviously, people talked about his skating, and some people are not convinced that he's got a good skate. I mean, I think we're all convinced he's got good edges, but if we look at the NHL edge stats, and I've just put up the stat here, Luke Hughes is a guy who I know a lot of people point to as an elite skater in the NHL, but if we look at the stats from last year, top skating speed last year, Lane Hutson was ahead of Luke Hughes, and bursts over 20 miles per hour. They're pretty even. So again, he's one of those guys who, may not look the prettiest because of his size and whatever, but he just, for whatever reason, he tends to get it done. And I think that's what's really exciting for us as Montreal Canadiens fans.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think he's a tremendous skater. I think that, both those guys that you mentioned have just really great skating ability, but they're also great multi-directionally too. Like, it's north-south speed is one thing, but having the ability to create, better lanes with good edge work, and, angling and other things that you can do to maximize that. I think Lane also has some of the most deceptive feet in the league for anybody, including forwards, so that's, when he has the puck, the skating is really on display too. These changes of directions, this, walking the blue line. I mean, there's the way that defensemen walk pucks off the half wall or get out of board battles is completely different than the way that Lane Hutson does it. So it's really exciting to watch. And I think the best is yet to come for him. I think that he definitely can be a point per game defenseman in the NHL, maybe a little bit better than that. And, I think the sky is the limit for him. The league will adjust to him, and he'll continue to adjust to them. And I think it'll be a fun battle to watch as we go forward.
It's one of the amazing things of being a fan of a rebuilding team is that you get to learn a lot of these little minute details of the game, like you say, walking the blue line, taking pucks along the board, like, because we have to watch, because the team was so bad for a period of time, and Marty St. Louis obviously is a great communicator. You learn so much more about these minute details of the game, whether it's defensive systems or all this different stuff. And it's been I mean, for me, as a bit of a hockey nerd, it's been a really fun ride. So it's been fun.
Yeah, enjoy it the rest of the way.
Yeah, and this has been a fun ride too. Listen, I won't take any more of your time, Chris. Thanks so much for giving us some of your time. I would love if you're agreeable to it to maybe have another chat a little bit down the road when things are a little less busy for you, where we can maybe do a bit of more of a review on the Canadiens prospects. I had Jerome Berube on the show before the draft, and he was great to talk to as well. And I'd love to do the same with you. Thanks so much for joining us. It's been great to hear from you, get your insight, and again, it's just a real pleasure. And I hope that you enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot, Devin. It was definitely a lot of fun, and I appreciate you having me on.
Thanks so much. Have a great day. See you later.
Thanks.
So that's it, guys. Chris Peters, guys. Sorry, there we go. Chris Peters, again, a fantastic source of knowledge as far as, particularly the prospect side of hockey goes. A real insider, a guy who, does his research, and it was a real pleasure to have him. And I hope you guys did enjoy the conversation, and I hope you got something out of it. If you have any questions or comments about that stuff, whether it's for myself or for Chris, feel free to post it in the comment section. If it's for Chris, I can certainly forward those questions along to him. But you can definitely listen to him on his own podcast with, oh my God, I'm drawing a blank, Cam Robinson. They do a really good show called, oh my God, my brain, Called Up. He's also, like I said, on the Athletic podcast all the time, and there's no shortage of opportunities to hear Chris's insight. So again, I hope you did enjoy. If you are new here to the show, please hit the subscribe button down below, hit the notification bell, join our community here. We're trying to create a community where we can have these types of intelligent conversations about our favorite game and our favorite team. And if that's interesting to you, then hopefully you will do so, especially if you're watching this in a replay. And if you do enjoy the content, give us a thumbs up. So that's it for today, guys. I hope you did enjoy the show. I really had a good time. I hope you did as well. And we will see you in the next one. Peace out.
Pour un gars d'ici, être le directeur de général des Canadiens est une occasion d'une vie.
Enjoy the moment, you're in the NHL here.
Working for the Montreal Canadiens is a dream. La plus grande franchise dans la histoire du hockey.
If it was my last day on this planet, and you told me what would you like to do, I want to be in that building on a Saturday night.